From the Foundation Studio on Biloxi Back Bay, Happy New Year. Happy New Year, and welcome to Super Talk Outdoors, where we celebrate every single Monday right here at lunchtime, the world-class outdoors of the state of Mississippi. I want to thank you for joining us on the super powerful Super Talk Mississippi Radio Network, or Super Talk TV at C-Spire TV. But if you're listening on Facebook or YouTube or your favorite podcast, it's January the 3rd. 2022, and it's a cold day. We'll talk more about that in a second. Finally got some cold weather in Mississippi after some record heat. Man, hunting deer and ducks in the heat, it just doesn't feel the same, and certainly deer aren't moving. We're going to talk about that in this show here in just a second. But it's cold now, and maybe people are getting some good hunting in this incredibly cold weather. Thank God we finally got some. Anyway, the 2022 legislative session starts tomorrow at noon. And as I said recently on my show on Super Talk Gulf Coast, in conversations with both the Speaker of the House, Philip Gunn, and Lieutenant Governor Delbert Hosemann, this is going to be one of the most important sessions in many, many years. They've got a lot of issues to tackle. But, I'm going to leave talking about the day-to-day activities of the legislature to my friends Paul Gallo and Gerard. They're going to be talking about the details. But from time to time, we're going to talk about issues here, and just in terms of the issues that matter to outdoorsmen and women here in the state. So we'll talk about why what happens in Jackson matters to you when it involves outdoorsmen. One issue that we're going to watch really, really closely is the Mississippi Outdoor Stewardship Trust Fund. This is a once-in-a-generation investment that we're going to be making in Mississippi's outdoors, at least hopefully making. It passed the House last year, the last legislative session, 117-2, but it got stalled in the Senate. It's going to get reintroduced this year, so we're going to be watching that bill extremely closely. We've got a great show today. We're going to visit in the first half of the show with a nearly 98-year-old duck hunter, Duncan Getsinger, and his son, Kurt. And in the second half of the show, we're going to update everyone on what's going on in the deer season so far this year. And we're going to visit with the coordinator of the private lands program for the Mississippi Department of Wildlife, Fisheries, and Parks. So without any further ado, let's move over to my friends Duncan and Kurt Getsinger and welcome them to Super Talk Outdoors. How you guys doing?
Doing great, thank you.
Good, Rick. Good. So Kurt, where are y'all located right now?
We're up at my duck camp near Satartia in the South Delta, right across the road from Panther Swamp National Wildlife Refuge. And
that's a great location to be, man. Are you guys thankful we finally got some cold weather?
I'm telling you, it was 85 here yesterday, and it was 26 this morning. So it's quite a shock to the system, but glad to see it.
Yeah, I have a place up in the Delta as well. We lease 3 separate farms and have friends and my son up there hunting now, and they're getting some good deer movement finally. But it's been slim pickings. My son actually had a pretty decent duck hunt yesterday morning, and we'll talk more about the ducks here in just a second. But Duncan, you're going to be 98 years old this month, right?
Yeah, so January 27th, I'll be 98.
Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. How does it feel to be 98 years old and still loving the outdoors?
It feels great. I don't know how I'd do without it. I've enjoyed it so much for so many years, and I've been coming out here and hunting with my son for about 40 years now. And the last 10 years, I've been spending all of the duck season here with him. So I shot my last duck when I was 95. And I haven't shot one since then.
Well, that's incredible. Kurt, it's got to be just a blessing to have the opportunity to spend so much time with your father.
Well, it really is. He's a special guy, and still get around, and he's operates as the camp cook here, and he goes out with us on hunts. One of the main reasons he hasn't killed a duck since he was 95 is because the doggone ducks have quit coming down here.
That's right.
So, hey, Kurt, what's your theory on what the situation is as it relates to the duck migration?
That's a good question, Ricky. And there are a lot of, I've been duck hunting in Mississippi for almost 50 years and in the South Delta. So I've seen a lot, and it's changed significantly over the last 10 to 12 years. A lot of factors have come into play, changing agricultural practices. Some of the floods have interfered with the hunting and destroyed some of the habitat we've had. These frequent long-term flooding we've been having in the spring and summer. And of course, just overlaying all that has been the weather. You know, Mother Nature really hasn't cooperated, particularly over the last 6 to 8 years, and it just stays so warm up north for so long that these birds are short stopping, and they're setting the table for them up north. And a lot of those mallards and birds we used to get here just don't come down until very late in the year. So it's kind of a shame. I think at some point, I think it would be a good topic for your show to gather some experts together and talk about the changes. It's affecting all of the Mississippi Delta, particularly the South Delta, but it's also occurring across the river in Louisiana. It's happening some in Arkansas, even up into the Boot Heel of Missouri. So it might be a topic you might want to pull some folks together down the road to discuss.
Well, it has been an ongoing topic of conversation here on Super Talk Outdoors. That is for sure. Okay. And I mentioned we leased a new farm up in Shula this year. And when we went to take a look at the property, we went at the end of February. And I've never seen so many mallards. They were coming in on sheet water we had out on this ag land. But we didn't see any of those ducks, certainly during the hunting season, and in the beginning of February, we didn't see them. And then I've also mentioned that between Greenwood and Blackhawk, there's a 100-acre cypress lake there. So I want to say 2 years ago, and then again somewhat last year, just mallards like crazy came in there the first or second week in February. But that's not unusual. You hear that a lot, don't you?
You really do. And and Ricky, back in the early 80s through the mid to late 90s, these refuges here, Panther Swamp, Yazoo, Hillside, Mahana is a management area. They would typically hold 50,000 to 100,000 mallards each, all during the duck season. They'd start showing up in early December and stay right on through. And you just don't see that. You're lucky to see hundreds of birds, much less thousands. So it's changed, and we can probably argue about why, but one of my concerns is there anything we can do to stop the bleeding and turn this thing around before we lose our duck hunting culture down here in the South Delta?
Yeah, I had Chuck Cage on recently, a famed duck guide from the Mississippi Delta, and he has a theory that the migration is moving more to the west. Of course, it depends on who you talk to. You get a different point of view about that, because as you know, you're a research leader for the U.S. Army Engineer Research Development Center. You have that kind of a mindset, so you want to understand what the data is telling you. It's a very complicated situation, and there's a lot that plays into that, and I know you know that very. Yeah. So Duncan, coming back to you. Yeah, go ahead. What were you going to say?
Just one more quick thing,
yeah.
Ricky. There's a fellow named Bill Cooksey. Have you ever run into Bill?
No, I haven't.
Okay, he's on some of the web sites, and he lives up in Tennessee, and he's extremely knowledgeable. He's been following this for 40 or 50 years, and he's got some sort of a foundation that they work with and trying to bring back habitat in Louisiana. But I might send you his name and contact information. Might be somebody to contact.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. So Duncan, coming back to you again, 98 years old toward the end of this month. Tell me what the outdoors means to you.
Well, it means a great deal. Started duck hunting with Kurt here when he was like 12 years old, and of course we've done a lot of fishing together and a lot of hunting together, mainly duck hunting, and both salt and freshwater fishing. So it means a great deal to me. It's been a big part of my life, and the good part about it is I'm still able to enjoy it at such an advanced age. I look at some of my friends, and unfortunately, they're not able to do that. So I'm very blessed in that regard.
You're a lucky man. I talk about it all the time on Super Talk Outdoors, and you guys know this really well, Kurt, specifically to you. When we come back, I want to talk more about the legacy of outdoors and how that has affected you guys, the ability to learn about life together, and the real fortunate opportunity you guys have had to spend over 40 years in the woods and on the water together. What a great story. When we come back, we're going to continue our conversation with Duncan Getsinger and Kurt Getsinger when we come back after this break. Football, a Gulf Coast sunset, and a Delta dawn. Welcome back to Super Talk Outdoors, brought to you by the Foundation. This is a group of incredibly dedicated volunteers, leaders from all across the state, that come together to raise money to help fill gaps for really important projects involving the Department of Wildlife, Fisheries, and Parks. And they do other things as well. And from time to time, they'll lock on to an issue. And when they do, it's important because they're extraordinarily well connected, and they're really focused on trying to improve the outdoors in Mississippi. They're protecting our outdoor legacy, the Foundation for Wildlife, Fisheries, and Parks. Anyway, let's continue our conversation with my two new friends, Duncan and Kurt Getsinger. I told them during the break, for whatever reason, I'm not sure why I have a hard time saying their last name, but I'll try to improve that as we continue this conversation. But anyway, Mr. Duncan, I should probably say, will be 98 years old this month. And he and his son have spent over 40 years together in the outdoors. Kurt, coming back to you, he mentioned that about what it means to him to have spent so much time in the outdoors with you. But what does it mean to you?
Well, it's been an amazing experience. We've hunted 40 years together up here in Mississippi, but another 20 or so before I moved out here. And, he taught me how to hunt and taught me about conservation and to respect the outdoors, and anything that we caught or harvested, we always only took things that we would eat or make sure other people would eat. So respect the resource, respect other hunters, hunting etiquette. That seems to be a missing ingredient with some of these younger hunters this day and times, unfortunately. And just to be able to be with him, and he was very patient, teaching me how to do things and letting me make some decisions. And so it's been a great relationship, and I've really enjoyed hunting with him. He's a good hunter and a good game chef too.
We'll talk about that here in just a second. By the way, for our Facebook, YouTube, and SuperTalk TV audience, sorry that the video signal is not too good. They're coming to us from near Sartartia, Mississippi, at their duck camp, and unfortunately, the Wi-Fi signal is not great today. But we've got a good voice signal, so that's working really well. Hey, Duncan, coming back over to you. You think about turning 98 years old. How often do you reflect on your legacy? I mean, what do you want people to think of you as you when you look at your life in its totality? You're a former dentist. You retired as a dentist, but what do you want people to think of you?
Well, I want them to think highly of me. I don't know really how to answer that question exactly, except to say that I hope people speak well of me, and I have a lot of friends, and I continue to like to have a lot of friends. The place I live at in Charleston, South Carolina, in a retirement center, independent living area center. I have a lot of friends there that are in their 80s and 90s. Just recently lost a good friend who was 101. And so I'm used to being around older people. And fortunately, most of them still have most of their brain intact. Sometimes I think mine's not completely intact, and the other times I reflect on it and determine that I've been so lucky to be able to carry on a conversation like this. So I guess that's about it.
Well, you sound great to me, and Kurt, you hear what he's saying. Wants people to reflect on him as a man who has lived a good life, and he's had tremendous impact on the people around him, hasn't he?
Well, no doubt about it. I mean, I have a brother and a sister, and he's, loved and helped all of us through our trials and tribulations and the grandchildren. And, but he's helped many, many people. When he was a dentist, he helped a lot of people that couldn't afford dentistry. And he was actually the first pedodontist in the state of North Carolina. So he helped a lot of kids and was very, very charitable and good to people. And that's, kind and good to people. And maybe that's why he's made it to 98, because he's lived that kind of life.
Boy, does it make a difference. It makes a difference. I often talk about, to succeed in life, one of the most important things is just to care about the people around you. And when you do, it fulfills you as a person. And I can't say how important that is. It's so incredibly important. So, Mr. Duncan, when you think about being the designated chef and cook at the duck camp there in Satorsha, what's your favorite thing to cook?
I think maybe my favorite thing to cook is what we call duck dressing. Are you familiar with duck dressing?
Well, I've various renditions of it. Tell me about yours.
Well, it's just we start off with a cornmeal crumbs, usually a commercial brand that's seasoned, herb seasoned and everything, and we cut up some veggies and put in there, and the usual things, onions and celery and carrots, and put some sausage in there, and then we cook our duck real tender. It's very, very tender. It just pulls off the bone and incorporate the duck in there, and then wet it all down good, either with chicken broth or with duck broth, where we've cooked the duck, and then put it in the oven, bring it up piping hot, put it on the plate, put some gravy on it, and you're ready to go.
Kurt, it sounds good.
Well, it is good.
So Kurt, did you guys hunt over the weekend?
I was hunting fire ants and mosquitoes mainly.
Have you had some good hunts this year?
I've had a couple of mornings where I've taken a few birds, but we're in another complication this particular year in the South Delta. We're in the middle of a world-class fall-winter drought. Panther Swamp is dry and the National Forest is dry, and even though I can pump up 40 or 50 acres at my place, when everybody's dry around me, the birds just keep going. It's hard to hold them. So we're kind of suffering through that. The swamps need to be recharged every few years, there's no doubt. But it's a shame it's happening during the duck season.
Hey, so tell me what you're actually an invasive aquatic vegetation expert. Tell me about what it is you do.
Well, my training has been in managing invasive vegetation and invasive weeds in aquatic and wetland sites using herbicides. And I've been lucky enough to have led a research team over in Vicksburg for almost 40 years. And we work with agencies, federal agencies, as well as state agencies and some of the private sector to evaluate and develop environmentally friendly and compatible herbicides that can selectively control invasive plants like giant salvinia, which they're having a tremendous problem with in Louisiana. They've had some issues over in the res in Jackson. You probably remember those stories from a few years ago. And one of our team members, Bradley Sarton, helped out on that deal. And water hyacinth, but we work all over the country. We work in 25 or 30 states in field studies from corner to corner to corner. And then we have a big experimental system that we can do small scale studies with in Vicksburg.
So I know you're focused on invasive aquatic vegetation, but what's your latest thinking on kudzu?
Back when I was at Clemson, somebody came out with a kudzu cookbook. I don't know whatever happened to that, but they were taking the roots and grinding it up and making all sorts of things with it. Kudzu was actually introduced by some scientists in the U.S., another agency that I'm not going to name at this time. And it took off, and they were trying to use it for a ground cover, and it got away from them. and it's caused a lot of problems. But it's actually a lot easier to control if you want to get after it than aquatic vegetation.
Well, that's great to hear. That's really good to hear. So Duncan, like when you got up this morning, what were you thinking about? What's your day look like today?
Well, this morning when I got up, I was thinking about this program. I didn't want to make a fool of myself, but I was hoping I would be able to carry on a good conversation. So that was on my mind this morning. But
well, you've been able to keep a great conversation. It's been an incredible pleasure to meet both of you, Duncan and Kurt. As you approach your 98th birthday, man, I wish you 100 more years of happiness. God bless you, my friend.
But thank you so much. I appreciate that so much.
Well, listen, when we come back, we're going to be talking about what's the latest in the deer season, and we're going to get the latest on the private lands program from the Mississippi Department of Wildlife, Fisheries, and Parks. We'll see you after this break.
I said, one Mississippi, there's a magnolia tree. Two Mississippi, where a mockingbird sings out on his limb, whistling that sweet soul.
It's Super Talk Outdoors with Ricky Matthews on Super Talk Mississippi.
Mississippi.
Welcome back to Super Talk Outdoors. I really appreciate you joining us, and Happy New Year right here from the Foundation Studio on a cold Biloxi Back Bay. It's cold today. Finally got some cold weather across the state of Mississippi, and that's going to help hopefully help the duck hunting, and certainly it's going to be good for deer movement. We're going to get to more about that in just a second. But I want to mention too that if you're on Facebook, go to our Super Talk Outdoors Facebook page and follow us. Like that page, because you'll be glad you did. All the videos from our show are there, and we also place some other content there as well. Like a couple of really popular photos and videos recently was an epic buck battle filmed by my friend Chris Gertz, and it's been viewed thousands of times. And there's also a rare photo that we put up there from my friend Oscar Newton, who took a picture of a bald eagle grabbing a really big largemouth bass. Now look, this bass is almost as big as the eagle, and the eagle takes it out of the water and eats it. You get this great shot, one of those rare photos. So you can go there and take a look at it. But so if you haven't seen those, you can go to the Super Talk Outdoors Facebook page. I think you'll be glad you did. Now I want to move over to the coordinator of the private lands program for the Mississippi Department of Wildlife, Fisheries, and Parks. John, is it Gruchy? I meant to ask you that before we started the program.
Yeah, Gruchy.
Gruchy, there you go. So it's great to see you, buddy. So look, we're going to talk about what you do in your program. Private lands are so significant. As I mentioned before the show, I often say as it relates to the Outdoor Stewardship Trust Fund that's going to be back before the legislature this year, that nearly 90% of land in Mississippi is private land. So your program is really important. So we're going to talk about that here in a second. But what's the word from the department these days about how the deer season is going?
Yeah, that's a good question. So, we kind of joked back and forth. We had a pretty rough dove season. There was some bad things. We think we had a bad local hatch, and then we didn't get the migration like we were hoping. And now we're not in the middle of a great deer season. And of course, it was 80 degrees yesterday, and so duck season not hot. We're not batting really really well right now. But obviously, a lot of that stuff is out of our control.
Yeah. The weather's been warm, man. I hunted all last week, deer hunted all last week. And one of my sons did some duck hunting, had some good wood duck hunts.
Sure.
And then my son Jordan hunted yesterday, and he got some gadwalls and some wood ducks. And so, not great, but at least they had some activity. But the deer movement has been incredibly slow.
Yeah. So there's probably a lot of reasons for that, and this is just kind of shooting from the hip here. We don't have great data on all this as the season progresses, but all the taxidermists and processors and everybody that we talk to, everybody's down. I've had several hour-long conversations with deer hunters that are just distraught. And what it really comes down to, man, is that deer are going to move for two reasons: the need to feed and the need to breed, and they're going to do that regardless of a whole lot of different things that go on in the factors and all that. But if you if you can provide a broad food source, and we've got a heck of an acorn crop right now. White oak is really good. Red oak is a little spotty. Then they have to move less to feed. And most of the people that we talk to have beautiful food plots right now because they've been off of them for the acorns. And then also we got really good food plot weather. So we've got, an abundance of food out there. So the need to feed movement is down.
Yeah.
The need to breed movement is going to be there, but when we get such warm days, they do have a heat stress issue that comes into play. And some of the radio collar studies that we've done with Mississippi State, they're still going to move, but a lot of it's going to be at night, when it's cooler, obviously. So all those things kind of pile on. And then last year we had this record season. I mean, every taxidermist was full and all the processors had to shut down. It was this record season, everything lined up great. And you think all those deer we killed last year, they're not on the hoof this year. So, all those things kind of combine to make kind of an off season. But, you're going to have that from year to year. We generally can count on one out of about every 5 being a real stinker, and we're going to get, some annual variation.
Yeah, what we've been noticing on our cameras is that certainly a lot more nighttime activity, not as much daylight activity.
That's right.
That confirms what you just mentioned. And you know what? Since we haven't had a lot of rain, the acorn crop, as you pointed out, was just incredible.
That's right.
So there's still, usually the acorns either they've been eaten or the rain has caused water to be where the acorns are, so you have less acorns available to them. It forces them out onto the food plots. By now, our food plots are usually eaten to a nub, but with the exception of maybe 2 or 3, most of our food plots look like a bumper crop of wheat and whatever else we have planted.
Yeah.
But you're hearing that story across the state, aren't you?
Oh yeah, across the state. And we keep telling people, hang on, the acorns are going to deplete pretty soon and we're going to get some cold weather. But a lot of people give up by then. So we'll see, but again, talking to we deal with a lot of taxidermists and a few processors, and they are seeing, it's statewide. They're at least 20% off.
Wow.
For this time of year. So
I don't disagree with that observation at all. Of course, the stats are pretty clear there, but
yeah.
They sent me a few videos this morning. Some of my friends are hunting up at our place this morning, and they've got pretty good deer movement this morning, but you would expect it. I mean, it's cold weather again. You still, you got some rut activity, some post-rut activity, but the bottom line is the deer are out there moving around. And, if we have I know it's supposed to get warm, but then it's supposed to get cold again. So, we still have a chance to kind of save the season somewhat in January, don't we?
Sure. I think so. And then there are large parts of the state where the rut's not even peaked yet. I mean, certainly Northwest and parts of North Mississippi, they're on the backside of that rut, but we've still got a good portion, probably maybe even 2/3 of the state that's still got a lot of rut left. So maybe we'll see some activity.
Well, listen, the Department of Wildlife, Fisheries, and Parks does so much good work across so many spectrums involving conservation, the outdoors enjoyment, which is really what this show is all about. You're the coordinator of the private lands program, and as I mentioned, nearly 90% of the land in state of Mississippi is private. You can't have a real statewide conservation program focused on improving wildlife, enjoyment, or outdoors enjoyment without involving private lands. And you're really focused on that in your world, aren't you?
Sure, that's right. And so there are major conservation issues, certainly water quality being a great example, but even we just got through talking about deer herds. Those herds are not exclusively happening on public land. And in fact, we looked at a survey that the SIAFWA states have done before, and in Mississippi especially, over 90% of the days spent afield. So if you're a deer hunter or turkey hunter, duck hunter, any of those kinds of things, 90% of the actual man days spent afield hunting are on private land. So that kind of lines up with the percentage of the landscape and whatnot is that. So we're definitely focused on private lands, not only for the big resource issues as you mentioned, but also because that's our primary customer. We're hunting license funded. Funded by, hunters and anglers and whatnot. And so if they're spending their days afield on private lands, the best way for us to serve them is going to be, going to them and bringing that technical guidance, as we call it.
I bet you see some great examples of of private landowners who are really dedicated to outdoors conservation. I think about the relationship I have with the farmers that I work with, and the work that they do with us. I mean, a lot of the stuff that we do, whether it be focused on duck habitat or whether it be focused on just improving the deer situation, we couldn't do, frankly, to be honest with you, if we didn't have the farmers involved in that process, because they bring people and heavy equipment to bear. And it's a great sort of coordinated effort when they get their crops out. They're kind of focused on helping us improve the wildlife situation. You hear that every single day, don't you?
Sure. And really a big part of what we're doing is partnerships, not just with farmers and landowners, but also with the external partners like the USDA, Fish and Wildlife Service, and some of those other groups that are not only funders, but they're also actively doing management. You mentioned landowners. It's important to note this is a free service we provide to our customers. And so we're working with landowners anywhere from 5,000 and 6,000 acres, these big tracts, to, we get requests all the time from 40 and 50 acre landowners. And at the end of the day, the guy with 40 and 50 acres, that's his kingdom, that's his palace. And he loves that, every acre of that 40 and 50. And so, certainly we're going to serve those guys as best we can. Now, there are different options for those folks, right? You got 50 acres, you're going to have a hard time growing, Boone and Crockett bucks, so to speak, when you don't have a single home range on that property. But, we can come up with some stuff to help those guys out.
One of the things I've heard people talking about a lot lately has been controlled burns.
Sure.
Brad Ferris recently talked about it in pretty significant fashion. And you guys have this Fire on the 40 initiative. Before we go to that, why don't we do this? We'll go to the break, and on the other side, we'll talk about controlled burns and some other initiatives that you guys have been involved in. This is John Gruchy. He's the coordinator of the private land program for the Mississippi Department of Wildlife, Fisheries, and Parks. And we'll continue the conversation on the other side. See you in just a second.
Mississippi, where a mockingbird sings out on his limb, whistling that sweet soul for him. I said 3 Mississippi to this land called home. I'll breathe Mississippi till I'm dead and gone. Just carry on, I'll carry on, Mississippi.
We live in one of the best places in America to enjoy the outdoors. So let's talk about it. It's Super Talk Outdoors with Ricky Matthews on Super Talk, Mississippi.
Welcome back to Super Talk Outdoors. We have John Gruchy, who's the coordinator of the private lands program for the Mississippi Department of Wildlife, Fisheries, and Parks. Man, you got to be thrilled to be a part of this organization. Man, there are a lot of dedicated people in the department that are focused on keeping people safe, making sure that our enjoyment is what it can be in this state. But it's a special department, isn't it, my friend?
Oh, yes, sir. Yeah, man, I've been on for 15 years, and I've certainly got lifelong friendships. Even the folks that have left the department, I still keep up with some regularity. Definitely a family atmosphere among the employees. When
we went to break, we were talking about controlled burns and the Fire on 40 initiative. Tell me more about that.
Yeah, sure. So obviously prescribed burning is probably one of the major, if you think about the major ecological drivers from a natural history standpoint in terms of the state of Mississippi, you really got flooding and fire, basically fire and water. If there's going to be a wetland or a bottomland area, it was going to probably be disturbed by some type of flooding at some level of frequency, who knows. And if it's an upland area, and in fact, we've got surveys from the 1920s where, important fire people visited Mississippi and said nearly 80% of the upland areas of Mississippi probably burned every other year at least. So, a lot of fire would have been natural on the landscape. And of course, we've suppressed a lot of that because that could also damage timber. The ecology doesn't care about whether the butt log's damaged or not on an oak tree. But obviously landowners are worried about that. We were worried about running cattle on some of that land. And so fire's been suppressed over the years. But for those folks that are especially recreational landowners, they've got a huge interest in wildlife management, prescribed burning, and also timber management. You can't really separate the two, but timber management and prescribed burning are probably two of their most important practices they can engage in.
So what you're hearing is that more landowners, you're finding more interested, less worried about, what it means to do a prescribed burn, and more willing to hear how it really can help wildlife.
Yeah, so it's kind of a yes and no. So what it comes down to is I think we're definitely hearing more interest out of recreational landowners, people who purchase the land with the intention of hunting and fishing as their primary land. But we've certainly seen a decline statewide in fire, particularly from the forestry segment. And that goes back to your liability comment. A lot of those forestry, timber companies, if you will, some of these other major forest landowners, they're afraid of the liability. And we've come up with new technology in the form of chemicals where they can get a lot of that competition control from chemicals, and they're not dealing with now. Of course, there's liability there apparently. So anyway, we've got a weird fire cycle, if you will, right now. But from a recreational standpoint, I think the interest is as high as it's ever been, to the point where we're having trouble getting that burning conducted. We don't have enough burners. So
yeah. God, I don't blame people for being a little concerned about the legal environment these days as it relates to, the potential liabilities related to burning. How do you guys overcome that?
Yeah, so that's a very good question. Ultimately, there's liability associated with everything that we do, and that includes climbing a tree with a high-powered rifle or a stick with a pointy object at the end of it. There is liability associated with all those types of things, and we have to manage that liability every day when we drive a car, do whatever. And there are ways to get around that. Now, the reason the liability with fire, I think, is so concerning to so many people is that it's so visible and so visceral, right? When we see that news footage of a huge fire and there's all this crispy stuff, houses burned up. And then the other reason I will tell you this, everybody puts it on Smokey Bear and they put it on the news and all these things. But everybody that I talk to, every person in Mississippi, especially where we still have a fire culture, everybody's got a fire story. If you sit on the tailgate and talk to them, they'll tell you about that one time I was burning a pile and it got away. I went to the store and came back and it burned up 20 acres and I'll never touch a match again. So there's a personal aspect to that liability, but we can manage that liability in a bunch of different ways. Obviously, there's insurance policies, and the Mississippi Forestry Association is a good contact for that. They have a lot of information about that. We also have really good fire legislation, man. Mississippi was one of the first, actually the first state. In 1992, we passed really good legislation, so the legislature's gotten involved. Now, that legislation needs to be updated, right? It was passed in 1992. That was a long time ago. So there's a lot of need there with legislative stuff, but we do have some fire legislation. And then lastly, the best way for anybody anywhere to manage liability is to just be careful, have common sense, and train yourself and learn how to be a really good fire practitioner.
So, John, tell me personally, what does the outdoors mean to you?
Oh, that's a tough one. A good question there. No, well, that's an excellent question too, and I think those are very good types of questions for the public to hear. And I'll tell you this: I grew up, I grew up, hunting and fishing, of course. But the biggest thing is that my family has a block of land in Warren County, 160 acres that I'm familiar with, and my best way to interact with that piece of land with the outdoors is through hunting and fishing. And it not only has an aspect where we're feeding our family with wild game meat, but it also has the aspect of, I'm the third and fourth. My son is the fifth generation to have killed his first deer and his first squirrel on that block of land. It means everything in the world to me, and I know that's private landowners that I work with have that same story.
I know they do, John Gruchy. You'll be back on Super Talk Outdoors soon, I can tell you that. But it's been
Yes, sir.
It's been a pleasure to visit with you this morning. Continue your good work with the private lands program at the department, and we'll see you later. Happy New Year to you, my friend. All
right, man. Thank you.
You bet. Have a great day and stay safe. We'll see you next Monday.
Yes, sir.
Mississippi.